Welcome everybody at this meeting with the entitled A Human Rights Approach to Combat Illicit Trade, the Case of Syria. So my name is Hussein Sabbaq. I worked with the European Union, and also I was chargé d'affaires in several countries. With me, I will have Mr. Nicolo Figa-Talamanca, head of No Peace Without Justice. I'm honored, and we are honored all to have His Excellency Honorable Fabio Massimo Castaldo. He's a member of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs and former assistant head of the European Parliament. I would like also to welcome the participants who will be joining us today. Dr. Abdelbaset Sida, he is a Syrian politician and academic, and he's a former president of the Syrian National Council. Ms. Nagam Al-Ghadri, he is a human rights advocate and activist and former vice president of the Syrian National Opposition Coalition. We have also among our partners who we are honored to have them with us, Mr. Luca Polternieri Rossetti from St. Anna School of Advanced Studies, and Georgi Tatar, he is from Budapest Center for Mass Atrocities Prevention. We have also Mohammed Mulawah, an activist in human rights, and also he was on tracking and monitoring the illicit trade, and also the topic will be discussing. We have also Monaf Oman from the Strategic Studies Center. He is also at the Syrian Council for International Affairs. The topic today is a general topic, and I think it was not discussed, or it was not really discussed enough in the studies where the different studies and reports focused on the illegal traffic of goods, and also legal and illegal traffic of goods, which affects the life of people and civilians, and also we would like to show and shed the light the monitoring of the violations of human rights, where the illicit trade has enriched and some terrorist groups, and also we have some armed groups, and also which increase the violations, where they have increased the prevention of civilians from getting their legal goods. And this leads to several questions on the mechanism that we can be used to combat illegal and illicit trade, and what are the approaches we have to use to prevent such violations. I will stop here, and also I will give the floor to Mr. Nicolo. Please, Nicolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hussein. The topic is how to combat illicit trade through a human rights approach. We should also, I think this is one of the main drivers and one of the main reasons, think of the crucial human rights impact that illicit trade has on war economies and in situations of political instability and conflict. It is not simply a matter of smuggling. It is first and foremost what happens in terms of the power dynamics within communities. Who gains and who loses in conflict depends in part on the economies of war. Who gets more powerful, who gets less powerful, sometimes is not even on which side is winning and which side is losing, but within each of the sides. And I think the conflict in Syria and wider conflict, the regional conflict also encompassing Iraq, has demonstrated that certain people have gained irrespective of which side was winning and losing, and certain people have lost irrespective of who's winning and who's losing. And it is civilians that pay the price and bear the brunt of not only kinetic action during war, but also the consequences on daily life. And the study that was undertaken and that will be presented today by our colleagues demonstrates the longer-term consequences on the life of civilians and of the country based on renewed power dynamics, mafia-like collusion that crosses sometimes even sides, and examines, as Hussein has said, not only the horrific effect of trading in people, trading in weapons, trading in antiquities, as has been the case very much for Syria and for Iraq, but even the trading of ordinary goods, the trading of oil, essential for heating, for fuel, for cooking, the trading of flour, the trading of water, the trading of yeast, the trading of everyday essentials, cross lines, and through networks of profiteers on all sides, has reinforced militias and groups, has made people emerge, depending on who would be more ruthless in each armed group with the civilian population. And this natural selection, unnatural selection by ruthlessness is perhaps a hallmark of, in particular, the Syria conflict, but is seen worldwide, whether it's in South Sudan, whether it's in the Congo, whether it is closer to home. So I'm very much look forward to the discussion of today. Very grateful to all participants, and very pleased and honored to give the floor to Honorable Fabio Massimo Castaldo. With Honorable Castaldo, we did also with Hussein one of the very, very first European Parliament initiatives relating to the conflict in Syria, and particularly to the human rights violations. When he co-hosted with members of parliament from other groups, the first time in Europe, I think, of the Caesar exhibit, certainly the first time within European institutions. That was a moment of pride for many members that they could use the parliament venue to highlight the atrocities documented in the Caesar photographs. They had been shown at the UN just a few weeks before, and they would have been shown a few weeks after at the Assembly of State Parties of the International Criminal Court. But that Parliament exhibit marked a moment, an important moment, and we're grateful that Honorable Castaldo was there to co-host it, and extremely grateful that he's here to talk to us today. Honorable Castaldo, you have the floor.
Honorable speakers, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, let me say that I am honored and pleased to be here and to address this audience today. And I would like to express once more my appreciation to everyone that contributed to the organization of this dialogue, starting of course with a special greeting and thanks to my dear friend Nicolò Figa Talamanca. Thanks to you, dear Nicolò, and to the whole staff of No Peace Without Justice. Thanks to Hussein Sabah from the Syrian Democratic Forum, and thanks also to have reminded our commitment many years ago. I was just starting my career as a member of the European Parliament when we decided to have this exhibition of the cruelty of the photos linked to the so-called Caesar file, to all these data that were recovered by this brave photographer of the torture and the massive violation of human rights happened by the regime in Syria. And thanks also, for today to have this organized, this stimulating debate, and for giving me the opportunity to share with all of you some reflections, some input to start the discussion, even in such a tremendous day for all of us, with the horrible news that are coming from Ukraine, with a massive military invasion perpetrated by Moscow. Let me also address a greeting to all the guest speakers that will take the floor and today, because the topic we are going to discuss in this session, the effect of war economies and illicit trade on human rights, is one of the most relevant and pressing issues we have to deal with. Corruption and illicit trade are indeed at the root of instability in many parts of the world, such as in Syria and in Iraq, in the intractable conflicts in Africa, as well as in many other scenarios of war. This phenomena contributes to the erosion of the rule of law and have a tremendous impact on the enjoyment of fundamental human rights. The case of Syria in particular, together with Iraq, is subject to the insightful report that has been elaborated by Peace Without Justice, represents, in my opinion, a striking example of this, highlighting the necessity to link the issue of illicit trade, especially in the context of war with the human rights violations. The Syrian conflict has been going on for more than a decade right now, with no end in sight. It is not a traditional humanitarian crisis. It is a protracted war characterized by unparalleled suffering, where violence fuels violence, one day after the other. In this context, illicit trade contributes to political instability, feeding mechanisms that favor impunity and increase the suffering of civilians. As the report shows very clearly, the dark link between trafficking and human rights violation is clear. Is crystal clear, I would say. Although, unfortunately, this link often escapes to the attention of policymakers and civil society that is engaged in defense of human rights as one of the elements that cause not only massive violations, but also the protraction and sustainment of the conflict in itself. This is the case also for the many countries of the European Union and the European Union as such. The EU is indeed actively involved in the Syrian crisis, both as a donor and as a partner of the international community. The EU and all the member states, or at least a great majority of them, are the leading donors of international aid to those affected by the conflict, having mobilized so far since the start of the crisis in 2011 more than 24.9 billion of euro. The EU has also organized over 5 consecutive years, from 2017 to 2021, conferences supporting the future of Syria and the region, and providing support to civil society organizations and human rights defenders through various programs. However, for what concerns the fight against illegal trade, we also tend to take on a strictly sectoral approach, mainly focused on property rights, risking to obscuring the social, political, and humanitarian effects of these practices. There is still much more that can be done, in my opinion, to combat the illicit trade in Syria and to help rebuild a country that has been torn apart by war for years right now. I believe that we have all the means to push for a change of paradigm in this sense, and adoption of a human right-based approach to countering illicit trade and the effects of war economies on conflict and the affected populations could be one of the key parts of the solution. The High Representative Josep Borrell has always taken strong stances in this regard, and the action in order to push for continued judicial efforts to take on impunity for the crimes committed in the context of the Syrian conflict. And of course, European countries have led the way in achieving some measures of accountability for atrocities in Syria. Even also in this aspect, we have also a long way to do still. Our parliament, the European one in particular, has been a very strong voice in condemning the atrocities and the violation of human rights and international humanitarian law, in particular by the Assad regime, and calling for accountability. In our recent resolution of March 2021, on the 10 years after the uprising that led to the start of the Syrian conflict, the parliament once again stressed that there should be no tolerance or impunity for the crimes committed in Syria, calling for an independent, impartial, thorough and credible investigations into and prosecutions of those that are responsible of those crimes. As the crimes and suffering continue, it is time, of course, for an effective EU action plan on impunity that underscores and gives the new momentum in Europe's insistence on justice for Syria, and that should also include this change of paradigm, guaranteeing the documentation and investigation of the crimes connected to illicit traffics and highlighting its repercussions on human rights represent the only way to fight the persistent impunity as well as the compensation of the victims. Finally, I also believe that it's crucially important to stress that illicit trade and all its implications, including human rights violation, can be fought effectively only by putting an end to the armed conflict through a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition. The EU should remain committed to this idea and find a lasting and credible political solution for the conflict on the basis of the UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and of the 2012 Geneva Communiqué. However, we have already witnessed how the lack of cohesion and the coherence of the member states in the field of foreign and security policy, in addition to the creating tensions within the bloc of European states, promotes the idea of an increasingly weak Europe that is less able to formulate rapid and common responses and effective action. That this is also linked on the fact that still nowadays we have to deal with a foreign policy that is affected by the necessity to always find unanimity to try to bypass vetoes, hesitation with sometimes the research of a common position that is weaker and is lower than we need to tackle this kind of crisis and to have a concrete and significant reaction that is proportionate to the difficulties and to the danger linked to this kind of crisis. So again, I would like to stress that more political and diplomatic unity is needed from our side as well to prove that we are a credible ally of the Syrian people, of the Syrian civil society in achieving this goal, and we are ready to do all that is necessary in all the multilateral fora, but as well with the concrete and meaningful actions in achieving this goal. I would like once more to thank you for your attention in such an important and delicate day, and I wish you a good continuation of this fruitful exchange of ideas. I can once more reiterate my full personal commitment and the full personal commitment of the colleagues of the European Parliament to give the chance to the Syrian civil society, to those one who do not have voice, to have a voice through our action and our political fight against the impunity, fight against all the crimes that are committed against them, and also the parallel crimes as the illicit trade that are making possible this conflict to go ahead and are totally instrumental to the massive human rights violation and atrocities that since more than 10 years are affecting the Syrian civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Castaldo, for your words. I think you are leading the way in the Parliament's response, not necessarily anymore as Vice President for Human Rights, as you were until recently, but we appreciate your continued engagement on human rights, and appreciate in particular the commitment on Syria after the Caesar work, after various attempts to resolve the crisis in negotiations. I think we now know that normalization is simply not possible without a true commitment to justice and peace. And the same actors that have engaged in maintaining the conflict in Syria now have brought the war to the European theater as a demonstration that impunity breeds violence, and which is one of your consistent message, that impunity breeds not peace but violence. So thank you, Honorable Castaldo, for your intervention.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation and for all the commitment organized. It's important, even in exchange of views. Hope to see you very soon.
I would like to once again to express my thanks to His Excellency Mr. Castaldo and to Niccolo for inviting Mr. Castaldo and his work, where was one of the leading MPs who prepared for this exhibition for the Caesar photos, and also to overcome all the obstacles and difficulties we had in organizing this, and to all his commitment to the Syrian issue later on. We know that he has other commitments today because there are other developments somewhere else in the world that are also linked to what is going on in Syria. And I think that the European Union should continue this and to have a political strategy, not a tactic based on wishes. No, thank you once again for coming, and I will move on to Dr. Abdelbasit Sida, and also I would like to ask you to show us, to clarify the situation now in Syria and how the crossings in Syria that we talked about, and they have became, if I can say, basis for human rights violations, and also which it provided opportunity to some parties to force their power and their control, and they have representing a fuel for the crisis and also fuel more violations of human rights. Please, Dr. Abdelbasit. Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody. I would like to express my thanks to our friends in No Peace Without Justice and the Parliament. Also, what you are doing is important work and distinguished work. This requires patience and time and efforts, but at the end, such activities and work that you document everything gives a result. Maybe it's not immediate results, but it's a long-term results, and it will be fruitful at the long term. My greetings also to all participants and the speakers. I don't want to take much of your time, but I would like to focus on the basics. The situation now in Syria is interacting or like cross-cutting with other regions or in the region. We had the Lebanese experience during the war in Lebanon. I was there in Lebanon because I was traveling to Lebanon before the war, during the war, and I served, my military service in Lebanon. So I know how things were going in there. There is no state, there is no authorities, no justice, no laws, no procedures there. So the de facto powers are imposing themselves. In Syria now, you know that there are several armies, several factions, several militias, several groups, most of them coming from abroad. So they are controlling everything. This controls and everyone. If we start with from the Al Jazeera, the Eastern Euphrates, there's the PKK. PKK it controlling the area. As the north west with the Turkey, you have the HTS. The Turkish forces are there. There are other armed groups there. Also, the situation there in other regions like the Damascus countryside and around there are Hezbollah, as well as Iraqi militias. All those militias and factions with the forces of the Syrian army, they commit violations. Therefore, they impact negatively on the life and the situation of the people. Of course, there's a set of crossing, crossing checkpoints from one region to another, and there are some crossing or checkpoints within the same city, like in Qamishli. You have a crossing under the control of PKK or others, and besides this, there were a crossing for the National Syrian Army, and everyone they are dividing the profits, and they deal with each other. This is the problem; they deal with each other. For the oil sector, when Daesh was controlling the oil wells in the Al-Hasaka, the oil was used to go to the regime, although it's under the control of Daesh, but the employees and workers, they used to go on a daily basis to the installations, oil installations with Daesh. And now it is the same thing under the autonomous authority, if I can say. Behind them, PKK. On other regions, there is a cooperation between those regions, and so goods that coming to Syria from any crossing or border crossing from Iraq or Turkey or maybe some other crossing. So meaning the goods move from one region to another through those powers and forces and militias. And also the living conditions of the people is very hard, very harsh. So, for example, what we see now last year, the situation was not good. We will face a shortage in wheat and barley, and so there's an impact also on livestock and also agriculture, etc. So the situation is complicated. So I would try to focus on a few points. So when we talk about the illicit trade, there are goods, food products that people need. For example, energy. They need it, but those goods who benefit from the trade and controlling this, and also the monopoly, those are those powers, the de facto powers on the ground. The problem with those powers and forces, they take the high profit, but they do not invest anything in services, or to renewing, for example, or restoring the infrastructure to continue, for example, electricity, water, and the health services, education, all those services at the lowest level. People are managing their own life themselves, and those powers, they get the profit. And also, usually when people complain, that when they compare it with other regions, they say, of course, here it's bad, but on other regions, under, for example, the regime, are worse. Or in that region, other regions, it's worse. Instead of having or competing to improve the situation for the people. So, beside this, there's another phenomena which is the violation on assault on the people's properties. For example, this is people are not here, people are absent, the owner is not here. So those forces, they occupy the house, they occupy properties, and they use it like. Sometimes they impose some conditions to force people or to evacuate people, to force them to sell their properties in a very, very little money. And people don't know how their future will be. There are so many cases in Damascus and all regions around Syria. Besides this, now there's the issue of drugs. This is a huge phenomenon. The top of the problem. Drugs were not disseminated in Syria, but now there are forces who benefit from this, and they disseminate the drugs all over Syria. And those who are behind this illicit trade, it's not only limited to the Syrian territories, but they try to export it either to Jordan, and to Iraq, or even to some European countries through illegal ports, and even through legal ports, through illegal, agreements, or and say, for example, they traffic on some drugs to some European markets. So we have to deal with it. It affects Syrians, the neighboring countries, and also Europe, because it's the nearest to Syria from the foreign or the Western area. So the situation, briefly, the economy is deteriorated, it's down, it's broken, the infrastructure is deteriorated. There are, gangsters and factions who are controlling all this illicit trade, and they are benefiting, and the civilians are the people who pay the price. I have lots of contacts with several forces. Everybody is suffering, is complaining from the difficult living conditions. There are some new rich people, new warlords, but the middle class people, if you can say, those who we could call them before the rich people in the past, we see now they are suffering. They are poor people. So many people, they migrated, they left the country. So many people from Al Jazeera, as far as I know, there are 1 million people who left the region. They live either in Iraq or Turkey, and others maybe to Europe. This migration, and now there are indications that this migration is restarting again. This migration is also a new market for the de facto forces on the ground by facilitating, giving, for example, documents, travel documents, and with this, so many people benefit from those documents, travel documents, the renewal of documents. All those issues reiterate and prove that the situation, if it continues like this, we will face lots of catastrophes, disasters for Syria. As you all mentioned, after a few weeks, maybe in 2-3 weeks, we will enter the 12th year of people are in the camps, and where the situation is very difficult. There are a set of social problems that have arisen. People are still waiting, but the problem, or what is more painful, is that even until now, there is no in the horizon, no indications or encouraging indications that there could be a solution. Before, the people were betting on, for example, an agreement, a Russian-American understanding, and Peterson was talking about, for the step-by-step policy, but I'm not hopeful. I'm with Bashar al-Assad. How can they go step by step as they did with Putin? They did the same with Putin, and today he invaded Ukraine, and the question is what's next, and he will not stop. And Putin also regained his power, and also regained the recognition from the world that he's a superpower now. Now he is coming to Europe through the Ukrainian gate. And he will threaten Europe. So the international community, especially in Western Europe and United States and others, we call them, they are requested to review a deep revision to see the reasons of the problem and what are the factors that led to this disastrous situation that Syrians are suffering. And I remember since the first day of the Syrian revolution, we said that Syria is the key country. Unless there is stability in Syria, there will be no stability in the world. Now, what is Lebanon is facing, Iraq, and maybe other countries is suffering is because of what's going on in Syria, because the Syrian wound is long. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Abdel Basit, for this clarification that you gave. Yes, and as you mentioned, the living conditions, the annual evaluation is year after year that the situation is deteriorating. We are not only in a vicious circle, no. The conflict led to those situation, and what we are discussing today about this illicit trade. And this situation and this illicit trade is encouraging the crisis and increasing the crisis, and there are any other approaches to lead to your question, to ask you, Luca, the point of view of the international law, and what are the approaches that we have to use to restore human rights.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Hussein, for giving me the floor. And thanks also to all those at No Peace Without Justice for organizing this event. It's my pleasure to participate on behalf of the Santana School of Advanced Studies. As you have correctly pointed out, the topic that I would like to discuss is the question of the linkages between illicit trade and the violations of human rights from the point of view of international law, and the need for adopting a human rights-based approach to countering illicit trade. So in essence, I would like to try to answer two questions. First, if we indeed need a human rights-based approach to counter illicit trade, and second, what can the role of the European Union be to positively contribute to achieve this goal? So with regard to the first question, from the point of view of international law, and also in light of what we've heard from our Syrian colleagues, it's absolutely clear that a human rights-based approach to countering illicit trade is necessary, because we have seen how important and relevant are the violations of human rights which are connected, which are a consequence of these forms of illicit trade. So despite this evidence, the fact that illicit trade violates fundamental human rights, the international legal framework, both at the global level and at the regional level, mostly focuses on the effects of illicit trade on goods. These instruments protect goods from being illicitly traded and protect the property rights of those who produce those goods or those who sell or buy those goods. Now, this is perfectly fine. It's necessary to protect these rights, but it somehow lives in the shadow the fact that these illicit economies have strong consequences on the economic, social, political, environmental aspects of communities, of individuals and communities. So I believe that a paradigm shift in order to integrate human rights into the countering of illicit trade is necessary. And I would like to give you a couple of examples of how this could be beneficial. Now, first of all, if we reason with the lens of human rights, if we use the lenses of human rights, we are allowed to understand what are the fundamental values that illicit trade might impinge upon, might violate. And these include the most fundamental human values. Life, we have been told that this might be the case, the health of people and the access to an adequate standard of living, including food, access to food and water, protection of the environment, sovereignty over natural resources, and also, from the point of view of economy, the orderly functioning of licit economy, because illicit trade also violates the right of people to engage in licit markets and economies. Now, these values are affirmed and proclaimed not only in international law and international treaties, but also, and this and with this I come to the role of the EU, they are proclaimed in European Union treaties, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the case law of the European Court of Justice as defining values of European identity. So I think that bringing them into the anti-illicit trade regulation and enforcement should be a priority for the European Union. And also this would have very powerful communicative function in order to convey to the public, to sensitize the public on the need to counter illicit trade. It's not just a matter of protecting commerce or protecting trade, which is important, but it's also about protecting people. The second example is that by using human rights-based approaches, we are allowed to enhance the legitimacy of mechanisms for accountability. Maybe we will discuss later on the options for accountability for what is happening in Syria. But certainly, by looking at illicit trade as the source of violation of human rights might foster the legitimacy of mechanisms for accountability, both at the regional level and also at the international level, for existing mechanisms and also mechanisms that might be created in the future in the event, hopefully, of a transition in Syria. And this attaches both to individual criminal responsibility and to potentially state responsibility. And third and last, I would add that adopting such a human rights-based approach would make it much more possible to effectively address the needs of victims, especially victims who are part of particularly vulnerable groups such as women, children, elders, people with disabilities, which are even more adversely affected by the human rights violations in connection with illicit trade. So this would help to design more effective mechanisms of response, both from public institutions, including the European Union, European Parliament, and also private entities or NGOs and all other actors which are active in trying to provide relief to the Syrian people. And this approach, I think, would be beneficial also to reestablish, when the condition will permit it, full confidence of the people in the rule of law and in licit economies and market. So very briefly on the second part of the question, what could be the potential role of the European Union? We have heard from Honorable Castaldo that the European Union has been very active in the past years to deal with these matters. And I think that the European Parliament particularly is well equipped to do its job in this regard, since it's the place where European citizens are represented. So it speaks for the voice of European citizens who are very interested to the end of the conflict in Syria and have been following the development of the situation in Syria in the past years. And I think that the Parliament and the European Union has played and should continue playing a decisive role in promoting this approach, in putting human rights into the efforts to curb illicit trade, particularly through its organs that aim at developing human rights and also international trade beyond the borders of the European Union. So it's not just a matter of raising the awareness within the European Union, but also it's a problem of external projection of the activities of the EU. And this, in relation to Syria, in my view, and then I think that Georgie will focus more on the recommendations also in relation to the European Union, could include potentially forms of consultation and engagement with civil society and also with organization of refugees, of Syrian refugees, which are present in European states, to discuss these matters and raise the awareness on the effects of illicit trade on human rights. And this also entails continuing the European Union efforts in the case of assistance and humanitarian aid to relieve the situation of Syrian people. And from my perspective, also in light of the efforts to establish accountability, the European Union should support those states that are trying to establish some measure of accountability for the crimes having been committed in Syria, for instance, in supporting efforts on the basis of universal jurisdiction and reinstate the importance of these proceedings. So to conclude, I think that international law has something to offer in relation to the solution of these problems, but only through the concerted effort of public institutions, scholars, activists, and also private entities, we could achieve effective results. And this is why I think occasions like today's one are so important, because they bring together different perspectives and different roles to try to provide solutions. So with this, I conclude my remarks, and I very much look forward to the other interventions and also for questions and other comments from the other speakers. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luca, for that exposition and very useful overview. And you mentioned Georgi, who I'm very pleased to introduce briefly. Georgi Tatar is the head of an important partner of NOPIS that has been working in particular on the policy recommendations emerging from the evidence. The Budapest Center for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities is at the forefront of the whole process of examination of indicators of atrocities and in the forefront of the debate, in particular in the eastern part of the European Union, on addressing the effects and the causes of mass atrocities and genocide in a region which now seems to be more worrisome than just a few months ago. And increasingly the rewards of impunity have been those of power instead of loss of legitimacy. Based on that, Georgi has and the Budapest Center have elaborated some specific recommendations, evidence-based, based on the field work and the research undertaken for this report. And Georgi, I would invite you to present those, specifically those, since we are at a briefing that involves the European Parliament in particular, specifically those addressed to the European Union. Georgi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much to all for the invitation, for the nice words, Nicolo. You spoke about us and about my organization. We used to also work in rather global terms, also horizontally, and unfortunately we needed to focus on our region for the last few years. But let's hope that we shall not have to enhance our efforts in this field, given the current conditions of Ukraine and Russia. The situation is rather dangerous, and so let's try to focus right now on another very important region. And the gentleman before me have pointed out to the challenges what they have identified during the preparation of the report, and definitely I think that also the recommendations need to be a tool for transforming these, the description of the report into actions, because finally, just to state facts, this is not enough, so we need to act. And as you said, Nicolo, yeah, I wanted basically focus on the activities, on the tasks on the part of the European Union, but nevertheless, I will want also to give you just a very short overview about the recommendations, which are rather detailed, and of course we were a sort of initiators of these recommendations, but please, that was a common work and a joint effort, and I would like to thank all of you who have contributed to this exercise. So the recommendations consist of three main parts, if I may say it. One is about the international community, so at the global level, what should be done. Then we tried to focus on the regional level, and we have highlighted particularly the regional organization, the most important one. This is the League of Arab States, who has a lot of tasks to do there. And as a regional organization, the European Union, however, we say that we are a global actor, and we do have also a lot to do in the field of international community, so not just focusing on the European Union. Then we have also made some very few recommendations relating to Syria, and given the fact that in the illicit economy, unfortunately, the private sector is also a suffering part. We also focused on some tasks of the private sector. But first of all, the most important point is, as the colleagues have said, that we have to finish the war if we want to really do something in the field of fight illicit trade. And therefore, we have to revitalize our efforts and to find a political and diplomatic solution to the war. And in this field, I wanted just to highlight the two things. We made some recommendations in the field of arms trade treaty, which was adopted in 2014, to improve the regional and national control systems from the perspective of prevention of illicit and unregulated armed transfers in the region, including, of course, Syria. And the other one, which is the so-called French-Mexican political declaration, which is actually about handling more effectively the situation also from the point of view of mass atrocities. But this encourages the UN Security Council to refrain from veto, and in these cases, and if they had done it before, then probably the whole situation in Syria would look otherwise than it looks today. It was a very important point what everybody has just underlined, the relation between the human rights and illicit trade, the human rights violations. So I think so. This is a very important thing. People are not aware of this fact, so we need to raise awareness of the nexus between illicit trade and human rights violations, and we need to also establish the mechanism, the established mechanism which monitor the situation and report on massive human rights violations perpetrated in Syria, and we do have several, that they need to include in their work in the future these grave effects what illicit trade has on human rights, erosion of the rule of law, and political instability. So it is also very important that when the various international organizations prepare risks assessments, also including the European Union, we do have the watch lists exercises, then illicit trade needs to be included as an indicator of the risk assessments. And the third point, which has also been highlighted by several of you, that when we provide humanitarian aid assistance and we design the development programs, then we have to focus on providing supply of alternative livelihood to the local people, because it's very important that they have to find alternatives. What is important in the case of this whole design of actions that we need, because of the specificity of the situation and the very specific and grave situation of civil society, we need to focus and to tailor all our actions to the local needs. And to that end, we need to consult very regularly with the civil society. And in that respect, we need to pay very special attention to women who play a very specific role in unfortunately suffering role in the situation, and we need to hear also their voice, their feedback, their suggestions. What we need to do in the European Union are that we need, first of all, encourage them to apply an holistic approach and integrated method, which is already there, but in this respect, we need to enhance this. We need to rely, as said, on the information, increasingly on the views of local actors. Whenever we do any action there, we need to update the EU sanctions regime and consider the elaboration of the European Caesar Act, which introduces secondary sanctions as a tool to reinforce the fight against illicit trade. To that reason, we suggest that definitely the meetings, we need to convene meetings of the committees and subcommittees of the European Parliament. So I don't want to elaborate, but Foreign Affairs, the Subcommittee on Security and Defense, the Human Rights, and so on, the International Trade and Development. Naturally, we need to organize roundtables with the European External Action Service staff and the European Commission staff to discuss the challenges and to call their attention to the specific tasks. But it is not enough just to focus on the institutions. We need to also focus on the member states. Therefore, the European Council working groups, the RELAX and the COJUR, the CONUN, the COHOM will need to be briefed and called the attention. So all in all, I wanted to, and the last point in that reflect that we have to take account of the principle of do no harm to an increased extent because of the specificity of the situation. And my last point to conclude it, that obviously we need to engage very much the private sector, please. They might help us to promote initiatives and mechanisms at developing holistic approach. We need to improve them in the advocacy and awareness raising effects. And what is very important, we need to organize consultation, set up consultation mechanism between foreign companies and civil society to exchange information. If I will have more time later on, probably I will go into further details, but this time I would like just to thank you for the attention, and any questions, definitely if you have anything about the legal aspects, we do have as well, there are a lot of things to share with you. Thank you very much.
أشكرك جورجي على هذه التوصيات الطموحة.
Thank you, Gorgi, for those ambitious recommendations and useful that we hope that they will be used and work on them when we submit them to where they should be directed. But we know that this will not be done except with more advocacy, the more raising awareness about the issue. And this is what we are trying to do, and we are here today. But the follow-up requires also more several civil society organizations at the political level, and also the executive powers also, but also at the legislative powers. We were supposed to have Miss Nagam Al-Ghadiri with us, but unfortunately she is with us, but she cannot speak because she is hit by COVID-19. We wish her a quick recovery. I was hoping to ask her about the violations that against women. For example, the rape at the crossing, and also the impact of the people, civilians, also on the women specifically, through the starvation actions and the shortage of food products, and also the role of the civil society in documenting those violations, and also to raise awareness on the illicit trade, also on human rights. And because of her health condition, I will move on to Mr. Muhammad Al-Marwah, who followed up the preparation and development of this report, and he will shed the light on those issues. Please, Muhammad. Thank you, Mr. Hussein, and thank No Peace Without Justice, and we thank them for organizing this session. I thank all the speakers who spoke before. In fact, the question, is the Syrian war excluded the vulnerable groups from being targeted? No. The answer is no. Women, children, handicapped people, elderly people, they were targeted. They were one of the main targets. They were more targeted than the healthy people, because you're the strong people, if you say. Those who are, in the past 10 years who controlled the situation, so many human rights organizations, registered more than 10,000 women prisoners held by the Syrian regime. There are women prisoners in SDF, also by SDF, northeast Syria, and with the HTS. So women are have been targeted from the beginning of the war. To clarify, I can give you an example. Since 2011, in Homs, one of the volunteers at the Syrian Red Crescent, while she was crossing, they stopped her because she was helping the people in need. And she was held a few months at the prison of the state security prisons. So the Syrian community was not accepting that a woman to be in prison or arrested. So her husband left her. He divorced her. So many people are without father, without a husband, because the woman was arrested. We have Dr. Rania Al-Abbasi. She was a champion in chess, the Arab champion in chess. She and her 6 children, since 2013, Miss Nagam also, we talked with Dr. Rania, and she sent a message, a written message, that Dr. Rania, she's 8 years now in the prison. Those are simple examples that express, talk about 10,000 women prisoners, 18,500 women were killed by the Syrian regime, or killed by Daesh, or killed by HTS or SDF. The violations, human rights violations against women are huge, enormous, from recruitment, trafficking, kidnapping, torture. SDF, they recruit women, and the young women, young girls, minor girls, in their forces. Besides, before Daesh was forcing women to marry from fighters, people, they are not known, they don't know them. Just a name on the country. Those women, the disaster is now, those women have children now, they don't know who's the father. So now I tried to shed the light on, quickly on few things. The European Parliament always, we request them, we ask them to define or to set, sanctions related to the Caesar law, and we ask if there's a European Caesar law. I don't want to open the floor now, to speak a lot, but I will give the floor to my colleagues. And thank you to No Peace Without Justice. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you for your efforts that you did in monitoring and investigating the truth on the ground and writing the report. Also in contributing to the recommendations. I will grab the opportunity of having Mr. Munaf Koman today to ask him if he has any comment before I go back to Nicolo. Munaf. Hi. Thank you. We thank No Peace Without Justice and all the speakers. First, I would like to express my gratitude, and I'm so happy to be with you today on the amount of information I gained, and you presented all. But I would like to talk today that today the world, 10 years after the crisis in Syria, so many countries started seeing the situation, the crisis in Syria that has formed to, all people are migrating, displaced all over the place. And today and in the past and maybe later, and we need to help help people, provide assistance to people, to Syrians all over the world. Today, all the regional countries are also, those are, becoming like goods moving from, for example, the goods are, trafficking goods, and trade, where the prices have multiplied 100 times or 1,000 times, and the civilians are paying the price by poverty, by paying a huge amount, a huge price. They are not sending their children to school, the girls, selling their properties and lands, just to survive. And also, all the problem in the Syrian society, the salaries people are getting are not enough to live for 1 week. All this, for the gives the Syrian citizen to go and benefit from the illicit trade also, because so I think part of the measures that we can take, for example, European Union, Western countries, United States, the measures they can take to combat violations, and also by, this has contributed to the deterioration of the situation, that this contributed to the increase of illicit trade and also to the poverty of people. Among those measures that I lived with them, they are not talking about the transition of power in Syria, and also all the organizations dealing with the regime, and all those organizations, they are not accounting the regime for the crimes, and also all the rights violated. So this has increased the violations. All those organizations and countries, they only, what they did, they just monitored the crimes. So I have to tell you one thing. So, and the sanctions imposed, well, also the sanctions against other countries, we need another approach, how so many sanctions, but I think that international organizations, they have to do a breakthrough this, and to force the regime for the political transition. The European Union has to design a new mechanism, a smart mechanism, for example, with Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, with the neighboring countries, and also with the different organizations. No peace without justice. Also, to account or to bring the regime to accountability, and all the gangsters and the armed group to limit the actions of the regime, and also. But the regime continues to act. Sanctions against the regime in Syria, they find their way only to the people. They affect the living of the people. So not accounting the regime is the major problem, I think. If we talk about the illicit trade in 2022, I think in few years, Syria will become a major hub for corruption in the world, global corruption. So there are different approaches we have to take against the regime. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, and for all your presentations. Nicolo, the floor is yours, please. Nicolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this really, truly a reality check on what exactly we're talking about. I mean, one of the things that we're most proud of in respect of this report is that it doesn't simply analyze the issue from a theoretical perspective, but through the work of many in the field, activists, documenters, analysts. It attempts to tell the story from the point of view of the people most affected, of the people whose rights are violated in part as a result of illicit trade and the power dynamics and economic dynamics that emerge from the illicit trade. So thank you very much for that. I believe we have a possibility of going around once more, if we have the time to do it, for a series of questions, and I. In particular, to address the issue of how to deal with a situation whereby the conflict is ongoing, the violence is still killings and bombardments every day, and yet the eyes of the world have moved away. They've moved to Afghanistan over the summer and the autumn, and now in the winter they've even already moved away from Afghanistan and into the situation of Ukraine. This conflict in Syria has gone on for many years, and it is now perhaps an example of a seemingly frozen situation, where, however, it is not at all frozen for the people who are being currently bombarded. on a daily and on a weekly basis. How do we undo the power dynamics that have created this situation? How do we prevent the gradual normalization not only of the regime, but also of the untenable situation that the Syrian people are in? How do we prevent it from being, quote unquote, old news, when in fact it is the daily life of many Syrians on the ground? It doesn't want to be a rhetorical question, and the call for action that this report brings on, specifically on illicit trade, requires also a wider call for action to not accept the current situation as the new normal. And on this, I'm not sure who to point to for leave the floor. Now, Georgi has made specific recommendations to the international community, and Luca also spoke. But maybe I should turn, therefore, to our Syrian partners and friends, and to Hussein as well, as my co-chair, to begin a short discussion on action points wider than illicit trade, but that include this element as we move from analysis to action.
لم يكن أحد يود
If no one wants to speak, maybe I'll say a few words briefly. Maybe I will repeat that we have to work basically with the recommendations we have here that Gregory contributed from Budapest, and also to take those recommendations is to try to work on them. We start maybe the beginning, the start could be here from Brussels, in our cooperation with the European Parliament, in our contact with the member states, European Union, to increase, to the raising awareness, and also to try to move the frozen political situation that is leading to nowhere and that has no horizons. And I mean here the political situation in line, in parallel with the situation on the ground, with the also the face impunity also for those who commit violations. So that the use of power is the tool that has become, I don't want to say that has become accepted, no, but has been neglected, but a tool to maintain power and to remain in power. This is the problem. And I think Dr. Abdel Basit would like to say something. Thank you so much. And in fact, those interventions and suggestions presented by all of you are very important. For the Syrian situation, it took time and lots of factors and countries, the regional actors, international actors on the ground, in the Syrian ground. There are so many powers, Russian, American forces, as well as Iranians and Israel also as acting, as well as the armed groups. To be more practical, I think from the beginning of the Syrian revolution, the first years from our meetings with the people in charge, senior officials, Americans and Europeans, my remark, I remember with meeting with the French President, Francois Hollande at that time, the return to the international legitimacy of the United Nations now. What is legitimacy if it's not serving the human being? So if there are violations on human rights everywhere, and also they are talking about international legitimacy, this legitimacy is just on paper. So now the situation in Ukraine proves this, that there were international legitimacy between people who were fighting in the World War I and also until the World War II. And also, they proved that they cannot follow up. I think the United Nations, in the current situation with the veto system and one state can block everything, this situation shows that there is a handicap of the international legitimacy for the European, Chinese. So, therefore, especially after the Ukrainian experience, the international community, especially the group who called themselves the Friends of the Syrian people, 100 countries. So they have legitimacy to go and to intervene, to impose few things. Therefore, through the European Union to reactivate this. But now with the Ukrainian situation, we'll go back to the Security Council, and with the veto, will not have anything. Therefore, the state system now is not capable of dealing with the situation after the Cold War. Now we are in a new Cold War and then in a war now. So, as for the recommendations, waiting for the situation, because the solution at the end, we need a political solution to deal with this, and there has to be a real state that can provide services to the citizens and protect their rights. But there are some solutions or suggestions or suggestions that we can have them. For example, the issue of controlling the people's property in several regions, in all regions in Syria, maybe through some pressures in some areas, we can exert pressure and to reduce the suffering of the people. So, also from our relations with Turkey, we have the Ras Al Ain, Al Abyad. We have so many people who migrated, they left, they are displaced. Also, the return of those people to restore their rights. Also, we are trying to reduce the burden. To intervene for the return of displaced people, the refugees. Areas under the Bashar al-Assad regime control, it's difficult, but the other regions, I think there has to be protection for people to return, because there are catastrophes there. To improve the situations in camps inside, the random camps. Every year we face new disasters, we see new stories. The civil society organizations and the countries who are supporting those civil society organizations, they have to check if the aid is really targeting the people in need. We have to improve the conditions of the people there. For those people, we can look for projects for people, individual, small projects for people to live and to provide us assistance. But we don't know if the humanitarian aid reaches people or not. For example, an Arab country, they provide assistance. I asked them, they said, yes, we want to send the aid. He said, no, we are sending the people the aid to people. Some groups take half of the aid, but at the end, half of the aid reaches some people. But at the end, in fact, what reaches the people is only 10% of the aid. So that's why the donors, they have to check and find, how to, secure, for example, housing, the revenues and income for people, even for sewing machine of people to make small projects before providing food assistance. Also, the other issue, the documents, Syrians and the diaspora in Turkey and elsewhere, they suffer, even in KRG, in Kurdistan, in Jordan, Lebanon, they suffer from lack of documents or to document some papers. This is a problem for them, and also it gives the regime with huge revenue and income. For example, renewing passports. Now they have a new mechanism to renew those documents through international organizations, or to give them temporary documents so they can move on. So this I do not have, a formula to find the mechanism that we can use, but we have to pay attention to this issue, because it is, more suffering for people. And second, we are supporting the regime with the foreign currency, with the revenue of those documents. Thank you.
If I may, just
ممكن أن أقول
just to encourage you, Nicolo, that you must follow up of these recommendations. So this is we may not leave it like this. So any action where you find way to do it, I am partnered with you because we need to raise further the awareness, particularly today when, as you said very correctly, everybody focuses now on Afghanistan or right now on Ukraine. So we need to do something. This is the first point. The second point, and I think so Luca will fully agree with me, that we need to encourage the collection of documentation of the crimes what are going on in that respect and in that context of illicit economy, illicit trade, because the international law, and Luca knows it much better than I, not only provides us the opportunity, but also obliges us to penetrate, to punish the perpetrators. So this is not just a theoretical issue. And my third point is, and last point, what I wanted to raise here is that we need to continue the supply of development devices, so the aid and humanitarian aid in a very specific manner to the people, because they are suffering because of the illicit trade, and this is an alternative against illicit trade and the economy. And thank you very much again for your cooperation for this whole project, and let's continue the cooperation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those final remarks. Also, Georgi, but also Abdul Basit, you hit the nail precisely on the head. We have plenty of tools. The EU sometimes has maybe too many new tools and not enough strategy. But this report, the work that was done in the field, thanks to Sant'Anna that has guided and validated the methodology, to the Budapest Center that has elaborated the recommendations, but most of all, thanks to the people who on the ground have interacted with the victims and witnesses and collected their stories. We sometimes say, when you speak for the victims, you take away their voice. We don't want to speak for the victims. We want to amplify their voice and their stories, and turn them into actionable recommendations. So thank you for that work that everybody has put in. I wanted also to add my thanks to a lot of the people that have worked on this in the field and elsewhere that are not present at this seminar, but we will continue to press hard and with your support. Hussein?
لم يبقى أعتقد لدينا إلا أن نشكركم
We
جميعا.
only have to thank you, everyone, for your participation, for your contribution, for your presence. I would like to conclude now by thanking our good friend, Mr. Aktham, for his great efforts for interpretation. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
شكرا. السلام عليكم.
مع السلامة.